So we're next going to be talking all about the Transport Trust, all part of our visit to Muswell Manor today. Firstly, I'd like to say thank you very much for coming along and hoping you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Certainly, I'm Stuart Wilkinson and I'm the chairman of the Transport Trust. I've been the chairman now for 6 or 7 years. Transport Trust, though, has been around for nearly 50 years, and we're the only organisation in the UK which is interested in the preservation of all forms of transport, whether they're in the air, on the ground, on water or on rails.
Now today is an unveiling of a plaque. I was hoping you could tell our listeners a little bit more behind that and what sort of role that plaque plays countrywide.
Yes, part of our remit is to improve the understanding of our transport heritage, and so what our red plaques do is mark sites which have some transport heritage historical significance. For instance, this is where the first powered flight took place in the UK, so that's obviously very significant. We have plaques as far down as Land's End and as far north as Scotland. And we have, this is number 63, I think, in the last 4 years, and each one marks a site of significance in terms of the development of our transport heritage over the years.
So these plaques are a new thing, or are they something that's existed a long time and it's just been the right time to have one here?
Well, we started 4 years ago and we tried to draw up our 100 best sites, as it were, and we're slowly working through them. Some sites take longer than others, particularly with listed buildings, and so it takes quite a while to get them organised. Now, where we can, we tie in with an anniversary or a particular celebration. This one we're doing now because we've got to it now.
Is there anything else you'd like to cover or tell our listeners about?
Well, the Transport Trust has quite a lot of members, several hundred members, and those members get a magazine every quarter. And we put on visits for members to all sorts of different transport-related places throughout the year, and we also make awards, cash awards, to help people finish restoration projects and to mark make personal awards to mark particular achievements. So that's what we do, and you can find us on www.transporttrust.com.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time out to talk to us.
Not at all, my pleasure.
So we are out and about at Muswell Manor. We're going to be talking to a series of people here as part of their unveiling ceremony, and we're joined with a relative of the Short brothers. So thank you very much, firstly, for taking the time out to speak to us.
Thank you.
Well, I was wondering, firstly, if you could introduce yourself and tell us your sort of relationship as a relative.
My great-great-grandfather, John Short, was the eldest brother of their father. There were 7 brothers who were all apprenticed to Robert Stevenson and served their indentures, and then all went off to be mainly mining engineers. Samuel was Horace, Eustace and Oswald's father, was the second youngest of the brothers, and Horace, Eustace and Oswald grew up mainly they settled in near Derby, and their father died when they were quite young and left them in straitened circumstances. Horace had a series of adventures where he went off to Australia to visit an uncle, ended up in a Mexico mine where he was the manager of a silver mine, and Eustace and Oswald moved to Battersea and with money that Horace supplied them with, set up a coal merchant's yard, but their interest was hot air balloons. So gradually they realised, in fact they sold quite a few hot air balloons to the Indian Army working in Battersea, and they soon realised that lighter than air machines was the way forward. And they set up here at Muswell Manor the first world aircraft factory. They had met the Wright brothers in France. Horace had rejoined them. Horace wrote down the plan of a Wright flyer on the back of a cigarette packet from instructions from one of the Wright brothers. Came back and that they found this area because the Wright brothers wanted somewhere quiet, out of the way and secretive, and they set about building Wright flyers under licence to the Wright brothers, who had come out here in 1909 to visit them. So my interest is in the Short brothers, who were working class, very poor young men who had an absolute vision and were very instrumental in the promotion of early aviation.
So it must be a pretty nice thing to see it still being celebrated and recognised.
I think this place, Muswell Manor, is absolutely unique in the fact that they have cherished the idea of where it all started. And I don't think that these pioneers get the recognition that they deserve. I mean, the Short brothers are not household names, and yet the contribution that they made to aviation is absolutely enormous. So it's events like this which help promote an appreciation of their ingenuity, their pioneering spirit, and they're just fantastic people.
So is this the first time you've been to Muswell Manor?
No, we came to the 100-year celebration in 1909, which was a good big event, which helped to put Muswell Manor on the agenda, and from now on we're hoping that it's going to just spread.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
That's a pleasure.
So we're now going to be talking to a representative of Charles Rolls. Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Yeah, my name is Steve Robson. I'm chairman of the Charles Rolls Memorial Trust. I live in Bournemouth, just a few miles away from where Charles Rolls crashed his machine at the Bournemouth Centenary events in 1910. Bournemouth decided to have an international aviation meeting, and there were people like Blériot, Cody, an American called Armstrong Drexel, and many others of the pioneers of flight in those times. I'm here today to celebrate Shorts, because Rolls was inextricably linked with Shorts. Rolls had learnt to fly in a balloon, but he was also experimenting with gliders in the Albert Hall, along with Mr. Brabazon. And at the same time, the Wright brothers were developing their powered aircraft. Eventually, Rolls met the Wrights. He was involved with Rolls-Royce cars and marketing the Rolls-Royce cars in America, and he met the Wright brothers there. He tried to get them to come to England, but in fact, at that time, they weren't ready to do so. But then the Wrights went to Le Mans in France, and that's really where the Wrights took off, so to speak, with their Wright Flyer. In Europe, Rolls went to meet them. He also encouraged the Short brothers to go there. And in that process, Short brothers agreed to take on a license to build the Wright Flyers, and that was the start of the Shorts manufacturing empire down here in Laysdown. Rolls had bought a Wright Flyer from the brothers in Le Mans, but it took a long time to get delivered. And so he asked the Short brothers to build him a glider so he could learn to glide, and then developed onto the aircraft itself. When the Wrights eventually came to England, it was natural for for Rolls to look after them. And there's a famous picture showing him in a Rolls-Royce car, Silver Ghost, with the Wright brothers down here at Muswell Manor. And so it's truly a cradle of aviation. If Rolls hadn't died at Bournemouth, we might even have seen a company called Rolls Short, because he wanted to build aeroplanes, and the Short brothers obviously were the people to do that for him.
So what other important things did you want to cover about Rolls?
Okay. Well, on this recognition day of the Short brothers, The Honourable Charles Stuart Rolls was intrinsically linked with them in those pioneering days of the early 20th century. Because Rolls died when he was 32 in 1910, his part in aviation tends to be overshadowed by the names of others such as Brabazon. Rolls had already shown his pioneering abilities in the development of automobilism and had established himself as a national icon and worthy competitor in road racing, a far more dangerous sport in the early 1900s compared to today. He had already flown in a balloon in September 1898, and this was 3 months after he had left Cambridge, rising from Crystal Palace to land in Epping Forest, a trip of 16 miles. Almost exactly 3 years later, in 1901, he flew again from Crystal Palace in the company of Miss Vera Butler, her father Frank Butler, and Stanley Spencer, all of whom were members of the Automobile Club. It was during this flight that the notion of an Aero Club was decided, and the Aero Club of Great Britain was formed later that year, with a first flight under its auspices in November at Stamford Bridge. The name changed to the Royal Aero Club in 1910. Ballooning was the great sport in 1901, but Rolls did not buy a balloon until 1906. He had found Eustace and Oswald Short in his search for excellence, and they had a workshop in Tottenham Court Road. But Rolls suggested they move to Battersea, to be near the gasworks. Not daft as it sounds, because obviously the balloons in those days used gas from coal gas. But he bought a French balloon through the Shorts later that year. Then he commissioned his first balloon from Shorts, named Britannia, to be built for the first Gordon Bennett race in September of that year, in 1901. It's 1906 by then. All this in the same year that Rolls-Royce Limited was incorporated. But while the other balloonatics were hard at it, Rolls and Brabazon were experimenting with model gliders in the Albert Hall, which was near to Rolls' house. Across the Atlantic at this time, the Wright brothers were perfecting flying their powered biplane. In March 1906, Rolls invited the Wrights to England, but they declined. In October that year, Rolls was in America, developing the Rolls-Royce business, and managed to meet the Wrights in December. 2 years on, in 1908, the Wright brothers were developing their European business at Le Mans, and Rolls had his first flight of 4 minutes, and was so smitten that he ordered a Wright flyer, and suggested that the Short brothers should meet the Wrights. Things now moved apace. The Short brothers bought 400 acres at Shell Beach, which became the headquarters for the Aero Club, here at Muswell Manor. The Wright aircraft order was delayed, and Rolls had to learn on a short Wright glider that he commissioned. And Shorts had attained their licence to build Wright flyers, Rolls ordering 2, and so the company established itself as the first to manufacture a production aircraft. Rolls visited Laysdown regularly during 1909, learning to fly on his glider, and when the Wrights visited England in May that year, it was only natural that he should host and transport them. The first short Wright was delivered in November, and Rolls flew a mile, reaching 60 feet, and earned an Aero Club prize of £50 in the process. Rolls was also first to land at Eastchurch when Shorts expanded. Plans were made for a Rolls-powered glider to be built, and RPG-4 is sometimes recorded as short number 3. It was clear that Rolls had planned to set up in aircraft manufacturing, and he had been involved with government aviation at Farnborough. Certainly the amalgam of engineering and salesmanship that had worked so well for Rolls-Royce car would have worked well in aviation. Had it not been for that fateful 12th of July in 1910, we may have seen a Rolls-Short aviation empire.
I was going to say, there's so much history to it, and this obviously plays a big role in it here at Laysdown. So a day like this must be very important that it's still being remembered.
Yes, well, I think the fact that I've driven over from Bournemouth this morning is some idea of the importance that I certainly connect it with. But I also have connections. My father worked for Shorts at Rochester during the war on the Short Sunderland. My mother was a wren locally, lived at Faversham. So I'm using this visit also to see my origins, I suppose.
I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time out to tell us a little bit about your background and the history and your sort of role at the moment.
Well, thank you very much for giving me the chance to speak and mention Rolls, because Rolls is little known, and he did so much for the Shorts and aviation in general. Thank you very much.
So we are continuing to talk to lots of different people here at Muswell Manor, all as part of the unveiling of the red plaque. We're next going to be talking to the new mayor. Firstly, thank you very much for speaking to us.
Thank you very much for them inviting me. I didn't realise this was here, I'll be honest on that. I knew the Short brothers came from round this area, but not not at Muswell Manor, or Muswell Manor as it used to be called. So
a nice one to visit as one of your early appointments.
no, we've had quite a few since we took over a month ago. We've had nearly 30, I think it is.
So busy.
Yeah, we've been very busy. Yeah, well, it's coming up for 30 anyway. So we've done some out borough functions and civic functions and things like that. Main one that we started with was at the Painted Hall at Greenwich.
Right.
The civic function there we were invited to, and at the old Royal Naval College. That's a well worth place to go and have a look at. It really is. My wife and I enjoyed that.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
I hope that's been of help for you. And
Yes, no, it has. So we're next going to be talking to the artist who produced the statue that's outside Muswell Manor. But firstly, thank you very much for talking to us. I was hoping you could introduce yourself to our listeners.
Well, I'm Barbara Street, and I've got long connections with Laysdown. My grandfather bought the bungalow that we have as a holiday home from Mr. Andrews, who owned Muswell Manor.
Right.
And of course he was here when the Short brothers were here. And I knew the history of the Short brothers, but I realised that lots of people here in Laysdown and on the Isle of Sheppey didn't know anything about them before the centenary. And I just felt, because I do sculpture, that I'd like to put a statue here so that Laysdown is known for this wonderful history it has. And also the Short brothers were very ordinary people, and they didn't have the fame that people like Brabazon, Rolls, Wright brothers, they just didn't have that, people didn't know about them. And because they were just ordinary people and didn't have an awful lot of money while they were working down here, I just felt that they should be known about, and they did such a lot for aviation history. And that's why I wanted to make a statue of the Short brothers.
Well, thank you very much for telling us all about it.
Okay.
So we are continuing to talk to lots of different people here at Muswell Manor. Firstly, thank you very much for talking to us. I was hoping you could introduce yourself to our listeners firstly.
I'm Jonathan Neame. I live in Faversham. I run Shepherd Neame, but I'm also a Deputy Lieutenant of Kent, so I'm here to represent the Lord Lieutenant on this very important occasion today.
Well, it must be a nice occasion to come down and be witness to.
Absolutely. I think it's a remarkable and fascinating story, this. It's a story that is not as widely known as it should be. The role of the lieutenancy is to promote everything about Kent, and certainly from a tourism perspective, people may think Kent is all about castles, cathedrals, etc. But this story is genuinely unique. That is an overused word. And I hope that today's event can in some way give recognition to this incredibly important part of Kent. It's a remarkable environment, wonderful place to be, both from a bird perspective, a tourism perspective. The beaches are lovely, but also this very, very important part of our county's history.
And I assume hopefully things like this plaque will help people be aware of just the significance of a site like this.
Yes, we were talking earlier. This should be made into a film. This is an incredible story, and if people don't know about it, they should come down to Muswell Manor and find out about it. It should attract tourism, and I think the plaque today is a recognition, but also I hope will raise awareness for this incredibly important piece of our history.
Well, thank you very much for talking to us.
Not at all. Thank you.